There it goes. Good morning and welcome to this afternoon's CAD-1 and Brian Mackey webinar, Detailing Revit, Part 1 out of 3 parts. And basically I'm going to turn the whole thing over to Brian Mackey.
Thanks, Tony. So we're going to be talking about detailing in Revit, and this is going to be Part 1. This is in a 3-part series. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the PowerPoint here and get started. So for those of you guys who are online, obviously that's everybody, we're going to go ahead and allow you to add, anytime a question comes up, feel free to ask a question. There's also a raise your hand button where we might ask for feedback. Gee, by the way, can you guys hear us okay? Anything like that. Feel free to raise your hand. You can also put your hand down, I believe, by hitting the same button. And GoToMeeting sometimes does become a little bit of a pain, so to move it off to the side, you can minimize the console by hitting the little orange-red button to do that. The other nice part about this is you can also change it, so if you guys are holding a telephone to your ear and you've got real work to get done, feel free to go ahead and change it to your mic and speakers and go ahead and put a headset in. It's not like you have to have speakers or, a microphone, because we're not going to allow anybody to be speaking. So really all you need is a microphone, a headset. So if you got a headset or you've got speakers, go ahead and change it to that and set the phone down so you can, not get a kink in your neck. So with that said, moving on into what we're going to be covering. So it's going to be a 3-part series, and this first part is just going to really be talking about how can we do detailing in Revit using detail components mostly, either over the model or not over the model, but really just how are we going to be using these detail components to take this along the way and start helping us out inside of there. And the reason we're using those detail components is so we can start tagging those objects. And what you'll see that whenever I get done with the detail, I rarely have a line or any filled regions or even a piece of text, because of the philosophy that I have when detailing is if it's not the model, it should be a detail component, and all of those detail components should be tagged. So we're going to go ahead and jump into Revit. I believe that's the last PowerPoint slide I have before the end. So we're going to go ahead and jump into Revit and see what's going on inside of Revit there. So what you can see inside of this file, get inside of here, is I have one nice little detail here. We're going to walk through how this detail is created. To go through and we'll talk about the detail components, the nice little orange box you see going around here. But just to let you know, what I'm showing you is going to be done completely in the 2-dimensional world. So you'll notice in my project browser I'm doing this inside of a drafting view, not a detail view. What I'm going to show you can also be on top of the model. And once we get the majority of this done, at the very end I'm going to jump into this detail view, which is a cut section through a part of the building. And we'll talk a little bit of the variations you can do if you've got a model in the background or if you don't have a model in the background. So most of this is what I'm going to be showing right now. It'd be like I'm creating my detail, my typical foundation detail, my floor wall assembly, whatever it's going to be. So getting more into creating all of those standard types of details that you're going to be using. And then once you get those created, you also have all these detail components that will allow you to be used on top of the 3D model where we need to model those. So one thing I always like to show when I start looking in this and before we really get started, my filter command, you're going to see that there is not a single piece of text. There's not a single detail line. There's also not any filled region. So everything inside of this is either a symbol, it's a detail component tag or keynote tag possibly, or a generic annotation, which is my symbol. So when we get inside of here, very rarely am I creating any detail that's going to be using just lines, etc. Even though you might see in some of my files that it looks like this is a line, that's going to be a detail component when we start coming in here, which gives us the capability to tag. Now, you might be tagging, and you'll see the one way that I prefer. I'm going to be tagging this with type comments. But you'll also see that when I come inside of here, if your office is the type of office that's going to use keynoting, so keynoting by the element, the same exact family, or families, same exact detail. The only thing I've done differently is I duplicated it, and instead of tagging the object, I keynoted the object. So when we get to that, you can see it doesn't matter if you're tagging or keynoting. We can go ahead and do it both ways when we get inside of there. So when we start looking at this file, what's really nice about this and what I love about doing it this way is, let's say all of a sudden I come in here and I'm sitting there thinking, you know what, a 2x4 isn't going to work inside of this. Well, if I take this detail component and change it from a 2x4 to maybe a 2x6, then what's going to happen is you're going to see all of a sudden now it's updated in my notes as well. So I don't have to come through, change the text file, change what's going on inside of there. I can come through and start changing just the simple family. So I come up here and realize, gee, that should have been a pressure treated 2x6. again, by changing the family, it's updating all of the tags that are going on inside of there. The same thing would be true if I was going to come in here and say, you know, this isn't going to just be building wrap. I want these objects to be, you know, maybe a different type of membrane, like a fluid applied membrane or grade D building paper. I change the family, all of the tags, in this case they simply look like text, are going to be updating as they go through. Now, the one downside to doing it this way is you may have noticed that when I took this 2x4 and changed it to a 2x6, it does move all tags, and this is the Revit workflow, it does move the tags with the component. So when that goes from a 2x6 to a 2x4, the tag may move back and forth. So this is one of the slight nuances that you may or may not notice. And don't I have a 2x4 pressure treated? I thought I did, but so there's my 2x4. We can come through, and you'll notice now the tag moves back. So as these detail components move and change and things, you may have to go back and start moving the text. So that is the downside of doing it this way, but the way I always look at it is it's more, I'd rather have text not align than call this out as something wrong. Something called wrong could be a liability and a money implication. The fact that text doesn't line up just means I'm a slacker and my text doesn't line up. So less issues I could be having if it's called out as the wrong object. So that's one reason why I like to do this, but that is really the big downside when you start coming through here and looking at this. So how this is all started when I get into this, for me, what I like to do when I start any type of detail, I don't care if it's a detail over the model or if it's a blank drafting view, I happen to have this nice little family on here. I call it my grid guide, and this grid guide helps me lay out what's going on for modeling purposes in a project. So if I come in here and I grab this grid guide, for me, I've got this family created where I can come in here and start saying, okay, here's my family, and I know as I detail this, maybe I'm going to be thinking I'm going to be detailing this where I've got 4 columns and 4 rows per sheet. Okay, that didn't fit for this detail, so maybe I'm going to do 4 columns and 3 guides, as I call them, detailing guides, for how is this going to fit on the sheet. So whenever I start a new project, I'm always going to go through, or not project, a new detail, even if it's over the model, I'm going to use this little grid guide family that I have sitting inside of here. So what I'm going to do, for me, I actually have a drafting view template built into my project template. And what I always like to do is just duplicate this view with detailing. And part of the reason I have this in my template is I know where the 0, 0 point is. It's not like it really matters when you get into the project. What is nice about having this is if I do export these out to AutoCAD for somebody else to use, they're not going to be randomly drawn in space. They're going to understand where the 0, 0 point is. So for me, in my template, I've drawn this up and got this set up as a copy of a drafting view. So once I get that drafting view created, my other routine is to go change it to be the correct wall type. So what kind of detail is this going to be? We're going to go say it's an exterior wall detail. And then I should probably give this a name rather than copy of. And go ahead and just come in here and say this is a detail wall foundation typical or whatever I'm going to be naming that. So once I've given this a name, I've got this set up, the first thing that I like to do is come through here now and put down that generic annotation symbol or my grid guide. So again, I've got this grid guide sitting here. I can come down and say, okay, I'm going to do again 4 columns by 3 rows. How do I want this set up? Where do I want this to be? And I can snap this into the 0, 0 location. The other thing that I like inside of here is I also will come in here and start drawing these and snapping these to line up with the guide grid. And the reason I'm taking these reference planes and lining them up with the guide grid is the fact that when I do that, I want to be able to take that, and those guide grids are going to help me line this object up on a sheet. So the reason I'm taking these reference planes and drawing them to my guide grid is I'm going to use these to place the object onto the sheet when I get inside of there, when that time comes. So we're going to go ahead and just start off with the guide grid. And now when you're going to go start detailing, I'm going to start bringing in my detail components. And in 2014, they did change the name to be detail items. So detail components, detail items, you're going to probably hear me intermix the 2 terms. It doesn't really mean one thing or another. So when I start coming down, you're going to start seeing a lot of these families. Like I've got just a simple concrete family. Now this concrete family for me is a line-based family, and you'll see underneath that concrete family I've got all of these different wall types. So if I wanted to come in here and just place a footing, I'm going to come grab my 12-inch footing, and then I can just start drawing this, and it is line-based, so I can type in the value, the length it needs to be, and say, hey, there's going to be my 3-foot detailing component object. So I'm going to draw this 3-foot item inside of here. Then maybe I'm going to want to come in here and start drawing a wall. So you'll see I've got this, 10-inch wall. Maybe it's going to be a foundation wall, so I'll come in here and draw a 10-inch foundation wall. And maybe that needs to be not 18 feet. Let's try that again. I hate it when I do that. Let's come down here and say we wanted this to be 18 inches, not 18 feet. So now there's my little wall there. And what you can see in my other views, I might have had something like a brick ledge. So when I start getting into this, a lot of times I'm not going through and creating hundreds of different families. I'm trying to sit there and figure out how can I come in and use these families independently, or use these families for more than one object. So now that I've got this family set up, it's the same thing. Rather than trying to go in and mask out a brick ledge or anything like that, I'm just going to grab a different wall type and do what I'm going to do here. So maybe I'm going to come in here and say, hey, I'm going to have a 6-inch ledge, so I'll come in here and draw this, and maybe I want it to be 8 inches tall, make it a brick ledge. So now I'm going from my 12 inches to my 6 inches to get this set up. So the other thing that I build into all of my detail components is the fact that I can come in here and turn on or off the lines at the beginning or the end. So if I want to take this file, I can turn the line off on the start, the first pick, or I can take this line off on the end, the second pick. So when I go through and do that, I can turn lines on and off. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my start line off, and you can see that now it's overlapping this. So to get this to work, I'm probably just going to take this and drag it down slightly, so it's going to cover up my other existing line. And as I'm doing that, you can zoom in a little bit more to get it a little bit closer, just until you see that that line is going to be covered up, and we can get this object set up inside of here. So using these line-based detail components, I can really start to go through and add in the start, end, offsets, etc., and get all these things inside of there to do what I need to do in here. So go through and got those detail components. So now maybe, similar to what we had, maybe we're going to throw a 2x6 or something inside of here. What really becomes a pain when you're trying to find these detail items is the fact that, my family, my projects, and this isn't even all of them, my server has like 400 detail items for the clients that I've worked with. So certain clients I go to 400 detail components, and trying to find those inside of your project is going to be a pain. Well, in 2013, they gave us the search command. So if I didn't really know what I was looking for, I can just right-click in the project browser, hit the search. Maybe I'm looking for something that has a 2x in it. So once I do that, it's going to take me down to, oh, gee, here's a 2x plate section. I can keep hitting the next until I see what I'm actually looking for. Or if I don't even like doing that, I can come in and start saying, well, maybe I'm looking for, nominal cut lumber, if you know the name of the family. So I can come in here and say nominal and hit find. Oh, gee, here's my wood nominal cut lumber. So as I go ahead and do that, it's going to bounce me down there. And that search feature is a great little tool to help you get in and start really finding out what you're looking for, what's going on inside of here, and how can we find that stuff rather than browsing forever and a day and doing it. Now, most people use the component command, the detail component, but I think it's a real pain in the booty trying to come through here and figure out where is this object I'm looking for. Even if I know the CSI number, which these are broken down to, scrolling down to the 06s and trying to get into where I'm looking can take some time to get through and set it up. So for me, I rarely use the detail component command. I find it in the project browser, and then I go ahead and drag and drop this object out here. So that's how I do most of my detailing. It's a little tip that I always like to show everybody. And maybe I didn't want the 2x6, I just wanted the 2x4. We'll grab the 2x4, we'll go ahead and place it inside of there. So now off of that 2x4, we're going to be putting our floor joist or whatever maybe it would be. So nominal cut lumber section. I might not have something in here like a 2x10, a 2x12, whatever else I'm looking for. So what's nice about setting this up as well is if I need a new type, what I can simply do is duplicate one that's there. Go ahead and call this one my 2x12. And then I'll go ahead and edit the type properties. And I'll just come in here and say, okay, here's my 2x12, and I really wanted this to be 11¼ inches. I can then come down here and change the text to be what I want that text to be. If you're doing keynoting, you'll change the keynote value for what you want the tag to be looking for. So when you get inside of here, these have all been set up for how I want to be tagging or displaying my text values when I do the tagging. So as I change the family, I'm also going to come in here and change the type mark. So now I've got my 2x12, come inside of here, use my space bar, place my space bar there, maybe it'd be a 2x10. You can start going through and changing those out. So I've got line-based families like you're seeing for the concrete, and I've got just regular single pick families or placeable families like you see with the detail components for the 2x's, etc. So again, I've also then got side views of objects. When I start coming in here, you're going to see I've got the nominal lumber side view. So I'm going to want to do a 2x12 inside of here. So now I can take this 2x12 side view, If you build your families with flip controls, you'll be able to flip them. So if I'm drawing it one way as opposed to the other ways, I can go through and start using the flip control to get that inside of there. So just going through and starting to use a lot of these detail components to go through and start setting this up. So I'm not going to go through and kill you with all of them, but I do want to show you a few of the components we've got. So we've also got, plywood. So where's our sheathing? What's going to go inside of there? Again, I may know the CSI number, I may not. So one of the things for me is I really like that search tool. So I can just come in here and search and say plywood, do my search, and it takes me right down to that plywood section. So if you know it, great. If you don't know it, you've got everything inside of there. So let's grab our 3/4 inch plywood. We'll draw this inside of here. Then we're going to need some sheathing, so maybe we're doing gypsum sheathing or something else inside of there. Whatever you're looking for, create those detail components for it. And what you'll see in detailing part 2 is how to create these families, how to do those families and take them and save them out as. Because for me, I started with a gypsum wallboard family, did a save as, made it my concrete, changed the hatch pattern, did a save as, changed the hatch pattern, made it my plywood, did a save as, changed the hatch pattern or change it to a masking region, make it my side for my 2x4s, and basically I started with that one line-based family and ended up creating 200-300 different, probably exaggeration there, but ended up creating a good 75 to 100 families off of that one. So you get started with that one, you get it set up, and you can go through and really start getting into what you wanted that to be. So we'll go ahead and copy this one, and we'll just bring this up. All right, and then maybe we're going to need the 2x4 side views. We'll go back up to our 2x. Sometimes I get frustrated that I'm so good and diligent about minimizing the families that I'm constantly using. So we'll come through here and we'll go grab our lumber again. We'll grab the 2x4 side view, just come in here and place this. Again, spacebar if you need to. Now, the other thing you'll start to see that I build into a lot of the families when I get inside of here is I'm not a big person on going in and putting brake lines in all over the place. If you use brake lines, that's great. You can use them. But for me, this is the other way. I turn off those extension lines. So I can just come in here and turn the end line off of these. And as I turn that end line off, now I don't have to worry about going back and putting a brake line where I might need it. I can just turn the end lines off and it's kind of looking like that detail's going through. So I've got that. We're going to go ahead and do some sheathing. So we'll find our sheathing inside of here. Direction. I'm going to use some gypsum sheathing. There's gypsum boards. Put some gypsum board in here too. So we've got our gypsum board. We'll just do 5/8 on this, even though it's more residential. I'll show you how to create another one later. And then again, same scenario. I come in here and turn the end line off, etc. So some of the other things that I like to build in is I know that if I had like 2 layers of gypsum board when I was working on this, that on that outside layer of gypsum, what I might want to be doing is seeing that as a fatter line when we bring this into it. So all of my families also, I include what's called the exterior face line. And what that exterior face line is going to do is be pre-built inside of there the fact that I can make this object bold or not bold when I start going into it. So as I place brick down, as I start placing the gypsum sheathing down, all of those different things inside of there are going to allow me to come through and start really showing here's a fat line to give us that detailed look that most of the architects like to do. So we'll go through here and we'll just grab in our masonry real quick. So we'll go grab our masonry. So we got our masonry brick on the side view. Unlike the out of the box where we've got 500 different sizes, I know usually I use 2 sizes, so I've cleaned some of that stuff out, so I only have 1 side, not 3 or 4 when we get inside of here. So we're going to go ahead and just do the 1 or 2 families I have. And of course this doesn't look like the wall's big enough, but it's okay, we'll fix that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to place this component. And for me, a lot of times I'll place that component and then I come back and I start looking at the properties of the component. The other thing is you can also, if you didn't know this, when you get these temporary dimensions, you can just simply click the grip to go from one side to the middle to the other side, assuming your detail component has reference planes inside of there. So once I get to that, I can then also come in here and say, I really wanted to drag that from here because I know I want this to be 2-inch air gap. So I'm just going to draw this object and then use this temporary dimension to start coming through and giving me what I'm looking for to get that object inside of there. You're also going to see that when I come in and start working on this, I may or may not have objects in there to turn things on and off. So in this, I can just say, hey, I want to turn the mortar visibility off on that. Now I can go say, let's go create another one of these, and let's put this one inside of here, although That one, since I said create similar, has the mortar turned off, so I should probably have not done that. But we'll just go again and do a create similar, and we'll place this here. Now, there's also this tip that I always like to show everybody, that when you start getting inside of here and you start doing this, it's really hard to place the second component. And the reason it's hard to place a second component is the fact that these temporary dimensions are on the screen, and Revit's like freaked out over those temporary dimensions. So if I place one, I hit escape a single time, and now I can place the next one trying to snap to it. But notice this one's trying to snap to full increment numbers. It's not coming in here. It's giving me the temporary dimensions. So by hitting escape one time, after I place these bricks, now I can go through and start stacking those as they go up. So I'm probably too many bricks, but we'll just leave it. We'll delete those. So you can go through and set those up, and you'll also see that just like with my bricks, I've got the exterior face line. So I can, if I wanted to, grab all of these bricks, if I was doing like a double width construction, and turn that exterior face line off. Or if I want to, I can go ahead and turn that exterior face line on to get those to display what I want to display. The other thing is I'm not going to go through and place 50 of these bricks if I'm doing a larger detail or a larger section. So once these components have been loaded, you also have inside of it what are called repeating detail components. So what a repeating detail component is basically an array of detail components you've already got loaded. So in this case, I'm going to go grab repeating detail component, and you can see that I might happen to have, here's my raised masonry, it's got my modular brick. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my brick modular, and I'm going to start right here. And now all I have to do is just take this line up to start drawing what's going on. And as you can see, as I go up and draw this, it's going to start putting those in once it gets past that object. So I can come in here and say, okay, let me go ahead and place those three objects. Now how that works is if I take that repeating detail and I go to its type properties, what is going to happen is the first thing that you're going to see in your type properties for repeating details are what detail component are you using. So in this case, I'm using the masonry brick side modular, the exact same one I placed down here manually. I can also come down here and say, what is the layout rule? Do I want to do just give me 3 of these, give me 4 of these? Do I want to fill the maximum number, etc.? So there's a lot of different layout rules you have inside of there. And then you give it, what is the spacing? So in this case, it's 1/3 of 8 inches. And if you don't know, that's 2 and 171 256 of an inch. As long as you're in any dialog in Revit, if you hit the equals, you can say 8 inches divided by 3, and it will give you the correct value. So when you're setting things up like this, you can just say, hey, here's this value, it's divided by that value, and it'll give you the correct spacing. Okay? I also have in some of these built into them the fact that I want to come in and add a weep head, because I'm going to bring this weep hole out right here, and I'm going to fill the bottom in with mortar or something. So I can really start coming through here and adding to those families by nesting other families into them. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and throw some plywood for the sheathing. So we'll go ahead and create similar. And I'm just going to draw some plywood going up my wall. All right, and actually I should have been gyps sheathing, so let me go find gyps sheathing. I think I have gyps sheathing. I might not. I might only have plywood, so let's find out. Let's do some sheathing. Yep. There we go. So there's my glass mat sheathing. We'll just pull this inside of here, and we'll draw this going up the building. And then I'll take that sheathing. Again, maybe you want the exterior face line on in this case. I don't because it's at the air gap. But I also want to turn the inline off, so I'm still getting that continuous clean. Hey, by the way, we stopped right here. Okay. Now, the one thing you'll have to start playing with is you might notice that, gee, this gyps sheathing is now on top of this piece of concrete here, and that looks kind of funky. So you do have the capability to bring to front, move to back, all of these different objects. So you can start playing with what's happening with that ratio, or with the scenario, is this in the front, is this in the back, etc. One thing that is also nice, in 2014, they've added the capability to select more than one object and send it to the front or bring it to the back. So that's a really great tool inside of here. Now I can say, hey, send both of those to the back, as opposed to in 2013 and older, I had to do one of these objects at a time, which kind of became a little bit of a pain. The other thing that you're going to see as I start coming inside of here using this stuff, so we've decided that doesn't need to be 6 inches, it should probably be an 8-inch wall. Again, I just change these objects out. You're going to see it starts going through and updating what it needs to do to update. So that's kind of one of the nice things inside of here. But the other thing that I build into all of my line-based families as we start looking at it, and see now I moved it to the back, so it's on top of this one, I got to send this to the back. What I start doing in all of these, if I use the align tool, you're going to notice that inside of this object, I have line tools centered out on all of these. So if this was supposed to be centered on this object, even though this doesn't really need a center line on any of these detail components, I always build those into my detail components, so when I'm trying to line things up, I can actually snap to it. So now I can easily get that centered in that object as opposed to having to sit there and fiddle with it forever and a day trying to figure that information out. So always building in alignment lines that just reference planes in the family to get me going. So the other one I really want to talk about is the fact that I was talking, if we go back to that other detail, when we get inside of there, getting into the whole, oops, I was there. This looks like a line, but it's not actually a line when we get inside of here. So starting to come down here and play with some of the stuff, one of the other tools, and see, now I've totally screwed that up because that should be going down to there. So I was correct in a 6-inch wall. See, that's what happens when you're not really thinking about what you needed to do there. Maybe this air gap needs to move over. So we'll just take this stuff and use the move command. It's one of the nice things about Revit. You can just go through and play with all of this. Move that over to there, and then let's just take all of this and move it down. That's what I meant to do. So now that we've got that created, what you're going to see inside of here is the fact that now I can come through and start drawing my other line and getting that other line set up to be my building wrap. So what I have done is I've also created a component that's a family, and this is a line-based family similar to the gypsum board, etc., but it consists of a single line. So it's one of the easier families you'll see me create, and if we have time at the end, this will be our kind of lead-in for detailing part 2. But I'm going to grab this little building wrap family, and what I'm going to do, come in here, is I like to use the offset option, and let's just say we're going to set this off by a 1/16 of an inch from the face of the sheathing. So I use the offset option as I'm modeling, and now I can just come down here and start drawing, and you can see that building wrap is going to be a 1/16 of an inch away. You know, I can come down to here, my chain's turned on, so now I can come into here, and then I can just draw this coming straight out and draw my little slope going down there. So I love the chain option as you start getting inside of there to get these objects chained together as you draw, and also using the offset so I can get it offset from the face as I see fit. Okay, so as we're going through it, so it looked like I was just drawing a line. It didn't act any different than a line, but it was still a detail family we got inside of there. So the other nice part about this that I want to start showing is how do the structural engineers use this? Well, how can structural engineers take advantage? To me, just the concrete wall in itself is an advantage for the structural engineers. What I've also done is I've also started creating more families for engineers as well. So if I get into my rebar tools, I've got rebars that you're going to see in the section view, but I've also got rebars that are going to be spaced in a section view. So if I wanted to come down here and say, okay, we're going to put some section rebars, but we want to be spacing these, or we're going to come in here and I don't have that one loaded. I might have to go grab that one. So I'm going to go grab a number 6 rebar. This is also a line-based family, and what I can do is use the same offset option. I know I'm going to want 3 inches cover at the base, so I'm just going to come in here and draw from here to here, and it's going to put in all my rebar for me. So this isn't a repeating detail, which I could have done this with a repeating detail component, but I don't do that because I like to build in other tools to this. So I can come in here and start saying, you know what, I'm going to have a 3-inch cover distance at the start. I'm also going to have a 3-inch cover distance at the end, and I can start picking from the beginning to the end and get this cover distance to go through where I wanted it to be. So I can build in things like cover distances at the beginnings, or even simple things like spacing. So maybe I want those to be 8-inch spaced. I can play with all those values, and as I start changing these values here, it's going to update it in the model. And the big advantage that I'm going to have is when I start coming in here playing with these values, I'm going to be able to tag those and see what's going on with those values as well. So there's my rebar space section. I'm going to go ahead and do my rebar space side. And even though it only sees a single bar here, I'm still going to use the rebar space side. And the reason I'm going to use the rebar space side on this is because I want to be able to bring that across and still have the spacing information for tagging. So gee, when I space them that way, I'm going to want them to be maybe every 18 inches. And now nothing changes in my file for that. What's going to happen in that scenario is I'm going to use that to update my tag. So I've got this information going on inside of there, etc.
Nice.
Then we're going to need the nice little. Thank you. So I'm going to use my variable bend here. So I'm going to use just my nice angled rebar. Just like anything else in Revit, spacebar will rotate these components. And I'm just going to place this inside of here. And you can see this is part of the other reason why I have these lines in here, is now when it comes down to pasting this rebar, I can snap to that midpoint of the line. Now obviously my legs are pretty long, so I can come in here and say my leg length only needs to be, 16 inches on that side. Hey, I chose right. Yay! Usually I get that one wrong. and my leg here is going to be 2 feet tall. So we can start playing with those values for what we wanted those to be, adjusting them, setting them up, etc.
Brian, how many other families do you include extra reference planes just for snapping to center lines, like for chairs or lighting fixtures?
Pretty much anything I do, there's almost always a center point for snapping. I noticed I didn't do it in the brick, which is odd. I was trying to play with that earlier, so I thought I had one for the brick, but I actually don't. Usually I try to do it for most everything. Just even though I might not ever use it, it might be nice to have for an alignment.
Yeah.
So the other thing I always like to show people as we start dealing with this stuff is I'm just going to simply take this component and I'm going to go ahead and mirror it. All right? And okay, that probably should have been to the other side, so I'm going to use my align tool to align it to the other side. But this is the one I wanted to show as an alternating bar. So what's one thing that's really nice about all of this stuff is I can come into this and send this to the back. But if I send it to the back, you're kind of like, what's going on with that object sent to the back? So I'm going to send this to the back. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this command called the Show Hidden Lines tool. In order for that really to work, I'm going to probably need to be in wireframe so I can see that object that's been sent to the back. So I'm going to grab my Show Hidden Lines. So I'm going to say I want to see through this foundation, and I want to see that object as hidden lines. Now when I go back to hidden line mode, I should see that the object is dashed. The one problem you have when that's happening, I don't know if you guys can tell on the screen here, that the perimeter lines become dashed, but the filled regions will still show through in that component. So I'm just going to grab that component again, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to override graphics in view, and I'm simply on this element going to turn off the surface pattern. So it's still the same detail component. I don't need an entirely new detail component on that. What I've done is I've come through here and turned it to be dashed, and then made that object surface pattern invisible so we can see just the family itself.
And you did that by overriding graphics by element?
By element. So it's override graphics in view on this single element.
How often do you recommend using by element, just as a general practice in any Revit view?
I don't use it too terribly much for 3D objects. When I get into detailing, I'm okay with doing that in a simple detail file.
Okay. Yeah, because I know Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. So things like that, it's just getting into here and just starting to do with it. And even when it starts coming into things like, maybe you're going to have a keyway inside of this. You're going to see I've got a family that's a concrete keyway that I can just bring inside of here. Again, set it down, place it. Okay, keyway's now on top of the rebar. So again, a lot of it comes to playing with your detail level or your display order of move to front, move to back. And now I can show the little keyway there. So it's all these nice little tools to go through. And I'm not going to kill you guys with detailing everything else inside of here. I mean, I pretty much have. But going through and understanding this is what we're doing, this is what we're setting up. What I like to do now is start talking about, okay, look, now let's start tagging this information. So when I come in here, I'm no longer going to do all of this text. Who likes typing text? I know I can't stand typing text. Besides the fact that when I have fat fingers, I misspell and I get everything wrong, etc. So for me, what I really like to do is come inside of here now and just start tagging, and this is what really becomes fun for me. So now I'm just going to come in here and say, okay, let's just do a tag by category, or if you're keynoting, do a keynote. So I'm just going to tag by category, and now it's just a simple matter of saying it's a free end leader, grabbing my concrete, and this is what this orange box is over here for, and then I can tag this. This is my strip footing, boom, boom, boom. I'm going to go ahead and tag the concrete keyway. Right, and I'm just going through and just tagging all of this information when we get inside of here. Probably going to need to adjust the leader on my strip footing, but that's okay. So you'll just see I'm coming in here, boom, 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 and just tagging all of this information. So it makes life much easier just to sit here and tag these objects rather than going through and, oh yeah, I'm going to set these all up and type in text them a million times. Now, the other thing on some of the families that if you've nested other families into them, depending on how you have that nest set up, I can use my tab key here to change from tagging the piece of brick to tagging the vent that I'm going to have out inside of there. So now I can come in here and just start tagging the weep vent because it was a nested family. Again, coming in and tagging my building wrap, whatever you want to start doing inside of here. Here's my 2x4 wood stud. Let's grab this 2x4 wood stud. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So it's just easy to be able to go through here now and document the model by simply just using the tag command. So that's pretty much tagging. If you wanted to do keynoting, like I said, you can still go ahead and do an element keynote. and then just start grabbing all of those objects with Keynote. So keynoting wouldn't be much different than this. I'm not pointing to the correct Keynote file, so my text isn't there, but it's just a matter of going through and just keynoting all of these objects the similar way to you would just tag them.
Brian,
So,
a question
yep.
came up earlier. Something you started to address, not on the tagging. So I can wait a minute if you're.
Yeah, no, he was talking about controlling line weights, and we already got that one addressed.
Okay, sorry.
So when we start coming through here now, what I love about this, and the reason I've tagged these wood studs, is there's going to be times where you want to say something different at this stud than you do at this stud. So these tags, if I go ahead and click on them, you're going to see they're tagging the type comments as well as the instance-based comments. So if I wanted to, I could grab this one and say anchor bolt, anchor every 16 inches or something like that. And that tag I'm putting on there is only going to adjust this one object because it's an instance-based comment. So I use my type-based comments for things I want to say like unit masonry, etc. But anytime I want to add a one-off note, I do that one-off note in the comments of the object. And that's one of the things that really starts to make this tool powerful, is being able to come through here and boom, one off this, here's a note for this one. You know, maybe I want to have a different note for this one. Wood studs, it's not a wood stud, it's a wood bottom plate. So maybe we need to change that. So that's the other thing that you'll start to see that really becomes nice on this, is maybe I want to call this a 2x bottom plate. Well, my family doesn't have a 2x bottom plate created in here, so all I have to do is just hit my edit type, duplicate the 2x4 and call it a bottom plate, and now just change my text, 2x4 bottom plate. Change my keynote if I'm using keynoting, etc. Say OK, and boom, now I've got the 2x4 bottom plate for this stud. So I've just created an entire new family, well not family, a new type under the family for the note that I might need. Same thing here, maybe I need this to be 2x4 pressure treated. When I come down here to the top, I have a 2x6 pressure treated, but not a 2x4 pressure treated. So edit type, duplicate this view, go ahead and call this a 2x4 pressure treated, and for my notes we're going to say PT wood stud. Boom, updated this family every time that family is going to be used, etc. We go ahead and start setting it up. So adding those instance-based parameters, the comments to it, really allows you to start coming through, setting this up, and getting the file going and what you need it to do. Now there might be certain situations when you're inside of here where you've got this one, you can see all three of these are calling out my rebar, but maybe these bottom two here, I'm going to choose a different tag. So if you're using custom properties, like on this one I'm using a custom spacing property, a custom size property, what I'm going to do is grab my detail tag for the rebar, and boom, now you can see those are number 6s. I should probably move that because my leader is kind of lost in the view. There's a number 6 at 1'6" on center, and here's my number 6s at 10 inches on center. So you can start building in shared parameters, those detail items, then creating tags that are looking at those parameters so you can start adjusting it. And the cool part is if I wanted this to be at 12 inches on center, I can come in here and say, no, let's do 18 inches on center. Oops, not 18-inch, but 18 inches. And even though I'm changing the tag, it's updating the 3D object. So that's one of the other beautiful things on this, is we can start coming in and changing the tag information. And if it's a scenario like that that's controlling an array, I can then have that information update the file as well. So changing that tag information updates the model, or not the model, the detail, really starting to bring that information through. So that's really where it starts coming into play, and you can really start building some of the speed into this, and the consistency in the line weights, etc., is going through and starting to build all of this information up when you start setting it in. So if you start looking inside of here as well, there's 2 rules and ways that people will do this. For me, I do insulation as a repeating detail component, and you can see there's a single detail component sitting on top of this. And the reason there's a single detail component here for my insulation, similar to why I drew these bricks independently, is you can't tag a repeating detail item. So the problem with repeating detail components is there's no type comment, there's no comment, or you have comments, there's no type comments, type anything, except for what family are you using. So the drag part is, if I were to come in here and try to tag this repeating detail, all I get is a question mark because there are no type comments to tag on that. So same thing with my insulation here. I've done this as a repeating detail component, but I put an individual insulation piece there, so that's the piece that I can come tag. I can come tag this nice piece of insulation, but not the repeating detail. It's kind of in my mind, a flaw. I wish Autodesk would give us the type properties for repeating details. Just give us type comments. That's all I'm asking. And we'd be able to do this information and get it set up. So going through, setting that up. The other thing, like even my earth here, so that's a good one to show. You'll notice here actually that I've got two pieces of earth. I've got this earth and as well as another one to represent the slope. So if I come over here, I do have my earth. We'll scroll down because that's towards the end. So that's not the end yet. So if I come down here, I do have one called earth. I do have one for gravel. I do have one for sand. What's nice is I just got this like at 20 inches deep, 18 inches deep, and then I just basically come in here and start drawing the earth going across. Now, yes, it comes in on top of everything, but again, I just go say send it back. And the other thing you'll see with all of my line-based component families is I have angle parameters to those. So what I can do is come in and do a negative degree to kind of get this to show through, hey, there's the earth inside of here where I wanted it to be. Then for like the sloping earth, I basically go do the same thing, but I might grab one that's a little bit thinner and just draw it at the slope I may need it, send it to the back, and then turn on my little properties for turning the top line visible. So since there's the kind of bug in Revit where this doesn't rotate as you do the objects, I take advantage of that here and really start to get this just to go through and show up. So starting to go through and even just show the earth higher on this side than this side, etc., can start to come in and just using line-based components. So the other thing that I draw and all of these detail components have, and the reason I do them, I'm just going to break this detail here, is I always put angle parameters on all of my line-based components. And part of the reason why I do angle parameters is because now, let's say I wanted to come off here at maybe a 45-degree angle. Oops, flip that. I should have flipped it. So once I do that flip control there, so what I can do now is, what would you have done in old detail components? You'd kind of do this, you'd have this weird crazy square. So now what I can do is just come in here and say, you know what, that end angle needs to be 22.5, and the start angle here wants to be 22.5. And I can just start kind of coming in here and changing these objects to get the angles where I needed them to be. In this case, it'll be negative. And then if you want the line, great. If you don't, that's part of the other reason why I say turn that line off, is now I can just get that continuous seam for that object going through. So on inside corners, outside corners, I don't have all these just crazy blocked square things where I'm start coming through here and dealing with it. I'm just setting this information up, adding the miters, and yes, I know that it's probably going to be square in reality. They're not going to go through and taper this out, but for detailing purposes, I'd like to see that. So it looks like we did have a couple questions come up, and one question was, can I do multiple leaders for a tag? No. In the Revit world, tags can only have a single leader because you're only tagging a single object. So if you did want multiple leaders, then you could tag two of the different objects and have it come through, or you can do an invisible generic annotation which can have a leader associated to it. I've never had the instance where I had to come in and do exactly the same two tags on something, because usually I try to call things out only a single time. But I know there are instances where a lot of people like to see it called twice. So in that case, one rule is to just go tag this component as well. And this is the rule I like to do, and then just line it up. And you don't see that there's two tags on top of each other. Part of the reason I like to do it this way is if for some ungodly reason somebody changes to be something else, then I want the text to update and not the arrow to be pointing to the wrong object. So I like to be able to go through, have that text update, etc. And if it does update, it's going to be in a different location. It's going to look different. And I'm going to understand, oh, something screwed up in the model or something changed. I need to address what's going on. So if you do need two tags, that's my recommendation on it. The other question that came up is, won't model hatches rotate? Model hatches will, correct. Hatches from detail items do not. So if you look at the earth hatch, you can clearly see this did not stay perpendicular to the object. In the filled region properties, there is this beautiful property inside of there. Oops, that's not where I want it to be. That's a detail component. If I go look at filled regions, so in my filled regions, fill patterns, when you're looking at drafting patterns and you edit them, there is this checkbox that says orient to view, keep readable, or align with element. Model, in the model, the drafting, detail, etc., you can keep those aligned with an element. You even have that option in the detail component family, but it does not abide by those rules. So unfortunately, hatches do not rotate from detail components, and it is a known bug in the Autodesk world. Okay? So that's really getting into the detailing. Let's go back to that other view and see if there's anything. And then obviously you can start dimensioning as you normally would. And one thing that I always like to start showing people too, so let's just say I needed to show this at 1.5 inches detail away from here. What is nice about the dimensioning as you start going through is if I do come in here and dimension this, I can actually use that dimension as I start moving this object around. So I can come in here and say, oh gee, no, that needed to be 3 inches away, not 1.5 inches. Now, depending on your family, it may move the family, but using those dimensions becomes really, really nice when you start setting these objects up. So as you're dimensioning, think about, gee, am I going to be able to use that dimension to help me start coming through and figuring out what I wanted to do there. So just one of those things as you're going through dimensioning, think about, you know, here's what I'm doing, here's what's set up, add the text clear, whatever you need to do, and really start using those dimensions to your advantage. Okay? So the other thing that I wanted to start talking about is what happens if you are going to be taking this and doing it over the 3D world. So if I go into my 3D view, this is a highly complicated building. So you can actually see I've modeled this in my building. I modeled the brick layer coming down in my wall. I put in all my floor joists. I put in a floor that represents the 3/4 inch plywood, right? I didn't model my 2x inside of here, but I did go through and, you know, do a little bit of modeling here. So when we start coming and looking at this, even though you might have certain things set up, you're still going to need to detail, because even if you've modeled in a sweep in your wall, you're not going to have the 2x in there. Even though you may have brought the brick down, you might want to bring the plywood down at a different elevation, et cetera, et cetera. You know, this is a detail component. I'm not going to model that beam in there around. You could, but all these different things, you're still going to need to do that. So one of the nice things about that is everything I just showed you can also happen inside of these views. So if I wanted to come down to this view and basically say, gee, I want that concrete keyway, I can still place that concrete keyway on that wall. It's still going to use the same masking tools and things I have set up to go through and set that up. I can come in here and still place the same detail component on the wood. So, you know, Division 6. So if I go and grab my section for my 2x4, I can still place this 2x components inside of here. So everything that we had before, you can still use to address what's going on in the model. The other thing that you might even take into consideration is if I've already got this hatch pattern from the model for the brick, maybe that repeating detail component doesn't have to be the entire brick. Maybe you can create a detail component that's just going to be the joint. And this one's for masonry, but now I can just click inside of here and say, oh, gee, I'm not actually modeling the brick. You'll see that if I bring it, I'll just do another one over here, I'm just modeling the reveal. So rather than going through and modeling every piece of brick, I'm just going through and modeling in the mortar instead. So exact same thing as before, but I brought in a mortar family as opposed to the entire brick family. So a lot of times when you start doing things, you might not have to duplicate all your efforts. You can just start thinking about different ways of doing it. Okay, so everything else is still true. So one other thing that I also like to talk about, and I'm going to actually just remove my little mortar thing I just put in there, that what might be nice, and a lot of people I don't know if taking this into consideration, is when you are dealing with parts of the 3D model. In 2012, we got these issues that are called parts. So even though this wall is one wall type and I was able to bring the brick down, I might want to bring the air gap down to here and the sheathing down to here and start playing with all of these layers independently. Well, you can't do multiple independent steps in a wall. What you can do is take this and divide this object out into parts. So if I take a layered object, a wall, a floor, a roof, a ceiling, I can say let's go divide this object into parts. So now what you're going to see is each one of these are a different individual part that we have. So now I could come in here, take my sheathing, and start pulling it down, taking my air gap and pulling it down. Now if you want to do that, what you're going to have to do is select the part and say I want to see the shape handles. Once I see those shape handles, now I can pull that down and start bringing it into where I wanted it to be. Maybe I want that to go there. Let's take the air gap, show the shape handles, and pull that information down to there. So you do have the capability to part out your wall and then start going through and seeing what's going on, adjusting those layers independently if you wanted to. Now, what's weird about parts is the only reason I'm seeing those parts in this view is because Revit told me to display the parts. And if I want to go back at any point in time and see the original wall, I can change my parts visibility in the view properties to show original instead of show parts. Come back here and say show parts. Now it's going to show the parts instead of the model. So you don't have to worry about if you've turned parts on it completely breaking your file, because if I come back over here, it still looks like a single wall. That single wall is still updated. But what you'll see is if I go into the properties of this view, I could in this view show me what's been parted out and now I can see all of those objects as individual part layers. So there is that capability if you want to keep, and you're along that philosophy, let's keep the model as intact as we can, well, you can part out those layered objects like floors, walls, roofs, etc., and then start playing with those parts. So it's a nice little display on what you start doing inside of there to see what's going on and understand with that detail. But you're still going to always need to detail. I don't care if you model 80% of the building, there's still going to be 20% of that detail you're going to be using, and hopefully you'll start going through and creating detail components and tagging those detail components instead. Now, if you have parted this out, we'll go back to that parted view. What you can also do is start creating tags. So even though this is still a part, I can go through here and still tag, and maybe I'm going to have a tag that's looking at the concrete wall. So I've got a tag that's going to be different than the actual tag for the wall types, right? So I've got my wall type tag, and I've got another wall tag that's just starting to look for the instance-based comments, the type comments, etc., similar to what I was doing with the detail components. So you can just go through and create another tag that's going to work on there. And the other thing that I always like to show, even if I'm working over the 3D model, is I'm still going to use my grid guide family. So I need to detail this. I'm going to come through here and place this nice little grid guide family over the model, because now I understand that model. I need to take the crop region and pull it down so I'm not seeing so much of that model. Take this crop region and pull it in. So even if I'm detailing over the 3D model, I'm going to be pulling in my crop region to get outside of the object so I can be where I need to be. So that guide grid family, I love it. I use it even if I'm over the 3D model. Periods, that's the room for my grids. Now I can go through detail over this like you saw me do, start tagging all the objects, either 2D or 3D, and just start going to town and doing all of that. And somebody said, oh, parts are great. I hadn't thought of that before, so that's kind of nice. That's a nice little feature you might have taken from that. So we've got about 8 minutes left, and I don't see any more questions come up. So I said if there's time, we're going to go ahead and show you how to create the line-based family that I happen to be using for like just simply my walls, etc. So to create this family, it was a pretty difficult family. What I did is I created a new family, went ahead and said let's use the out-of-the-box Imperial families, and I'm going to go ahead and create a detail item that's line-based. All right, so this detail item line-based has these reference planes, and all this family needs to be is a line. Take this one line, I'm going to draw it from reference plane to reference plane, and I'm going to make sure I padlock it to the horizontal reference plane as well as the two vertical reference planes. So I'm going to need to use my align command from here, go to here, hit the padlock, and I've now taken that line and created it. Make it whatever line weight or company line style that you're going to be using. I'm going to use heavy lines just to make it something different. Save the family. Create new family types. This is my stuff close type, and my identity data wants to be, this is something in your face. This is something that's really close to you. We'll go create another new type. This is a fat line, and this comment's going to say fat line. So as you go through and start creating this stuff, now I've got that family created, I can load it into the project, and maybe I want to come and start drawing a fat line that's 1/4 of an inch higher than this one. I can just click 1/4 of an inch, not just 1/4. 1/4 of an inch higher, click this, spacebar to rotate it. There's my fat line. And maybe I could go, you know what, here we go, we're going to edit the type. We're going to duplicate this, and we're going to call it finished floor. I couldn't think of anything when I was in the family, but now we've got it. So here's my finished floor family. We'll type in finished floor. And if you're an engineer, you'd probably say RE in ARC. All right. And so now I can just go do my tag by category. There's my finished floor RE architectural, and boom, now we're done.
Nice.
So very simple line-based family in order for that to happen. Now, as I was doing that, something popped into my brain, so since still no questions, the other thing that's going to happen is going to be some times where you've got like a family that's specific to this project, but you might not need to make it parametric, but you still want to make it a family because you're going to see it in 3 or 4 details. So I'm just going to come in here, I'm going to go to my annotate tab, I'm going to grab a detail line, and we're just going to pretend that this is a parapet cap, right? And I'm just going to come in here, and I'm not being accurate at all. I should probably turn my chain on. So this is going to be a parapet cap on this beautiful wall. All right, you can see I'm being extremely accurate on this. But what I'm going to do is just simply draw some lines, and it doesn't matter what line type you use because you're going to fix that in the family. But not only do I draw the lines of what I want, I'm going to draw some lines where I'm going to want the insertion point to be. So I'm going to draw one other detail line. I'm going to say the end of this brick. And I always just draw that off at an angle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and select those lines I've drawn, select the insertion point line as I call it, and I'm going to cut, using the cut clipboard, cut all this stuff to the clipboard. I'm then going to go start a new family, and this is going to be just a detail item family. It's not going to be line based. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Manage tab, Modify tab, excuse me. I'm going to say Paste, paste from clipboard, place it in here, and what you're going to see is the crossing point of these insertion point, or these reference planes, is your insertion point. So then I'm just going to move all of those objects to the insertion point. I'm going to delete my insertion point line, and I'm going to select these to be the line weight I wanted them to be. Say heavy lines. I'm going to go into my family types. I'm going to call this one a cap. And then I'm going to come down to my type comments and say parapet cap, yada, yada, yada. I would save that, load it into my project, and now I've got this detail component with an insertion point that makes sense, and I can still come back and tag that object. So even if I'm on a project that has a single family that doesn't need to be parametric, it's specific to this project, I just simply draw it in the project because that's where the lines are going to be easy to do, copy it to the clipboard, cut it to the clipboard, paste it in a family, load it in, tag it, there we go.
Brian, how often do you use that copy and paste to go from a family to a project to a family, or within, if you're in sketch mode, to take it in or out of sketch mode?
I use copy to clipboard paste a lot. It's like I had the question come up the other day that I'm creating a 3D countertop, and it's just a one-off countertop. How would I do that? Well, my theory is I go in and I draw the floor plan, cut them to the clipboard, start a new family, paste them into that family, and now I have a family that's going to be just that countertop that I can bring into the project. So I use that copy to clipboard paste quite often.
Yeah, and it seems to work. Does it work most of the time? In my experience, it has. Go from one object or one item to another in sketch mode, out of sketch mode.
The only time it doesn't work is if I had drawn model lines. You can't copy model lines and paste them into a detail family. They have to be annotative or symbolic lines.
Right. Cool.
Detail lines. Okay. So somebody came up and said, do you have a place that we could download these families? My blog does have the grid guide family. So if you wanted to, you can go to my blog to get that family. It's just BD Mackey Consulting, and under the blog, we'll type in grid. And one of them should come up somewhere where that grid guide family is. So if you're looking for that, yeah, so detailing grid guide. And I do have it on here, so you can go down that. As for the other families, some of those families, like the gypsum board, I can give you things like that, but a lot of those families were created specifically for a client, and since they paid me to create it, I don't give those families out. But I can give you the rebar families if you guys want, the brick family, because that's pretty much out-of-the-box brick family with slight modifications. It doesn't always help everybody, because one of the big things that you'll start to see when I get into these families, and I'll talk more about this in part 2 next month, is that when I go create a new family, I have templates for a lot of my different clients. So if I go to my one client and I start looking at his template for creating detail components, his template's going to be different than somebody else's because they use different fill patterns, they use different line weights, they use different naming conventions. So if I start this family, you're going to see that the filled regions might be different. They have orange, blue, green, red, and then also if I were to go just create a line, you're going to see that they have their own line types that they use inside of their files. So usually it ends up being, even though I give you the family, you're still going to have to recreate it for what your company standards are. So I have a few that are pretty basic and simple, but
yeah, and sometimes it's more important to understand, how it's working, because if you spend all the time changing everything, you're going to have to figure out how it's working anyway.
Yeah. So that's one of those things. There's a few I can give. Honestly, my detail component library is not that large because most of the time I'm creating these specifically for a client who's paying. Therefore, they get to own that information.
Right.
So, and with that said.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's a part 2 coming up next month. That'll be in, I think, 5 or 6 weeks. It's November 14th.
Yeah, so it's right after the next Revit Radio as well. And with
And
that said,
there's a part 3. I didn't look for the date on that. It's December, I believe.
yeah, I
Middle of
believe it's December after Autodesk University, but I'll have to go back and look.
Yeah, December 12th is part 3.
There you go. Thank you for looking. So with that said, if you guys have any comments or questions, or if you do want me to email you a couple of those files, feel free to send either myself an email. You can find it on my blog, or just Google the Revit Geek, or send CAD-1 an email. We'll make sure that we get you a few of those families that I've created that you guys can have. And other than that, I think that's all I have. Did you have anything else, Tony?
Now we have some other webinars coming up. I was going to say Brian Jude is going to do log and timber construction in Revit for architectural timber walls. I know that's something that maybe is a little more popular in Colorado than some other places.
And then I think we're also going to have Revit Radio. If you don't know what that is, go to the CAD-1 website or go to revitradio.co, and that's where you guys get to answer any Revit-related question live on a webcast, and we answer them on the fly. So if you have any questions
I've recommended Revit Radio to a lot of different people that I run across working in Revit, and that'll be the same day as the detailing part 2, November 14.
Yep.
So yeah, that's all I have.
With that said, I appreciate everybody, using an hour of your billable time, and hopefully you learned something new from this, even if it wasn't anything that you've known before. Hope you picked up some little tip on what you were doing. Hopefully that will work for you. And thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right, take care.